They burned her home. They burned her name. And when the smoke cleared, no one came. No one, except a man who didn't speak much, and a people the town refused to see. This isn't just a story of survival. It's about what happens when silence is broken, when the ones left with nothing decide they've had enough. So ask yourself, when a town lets a woman burn, who gets to build what comes next? The wind swept down off the ridge like it was chasing ghosts. Dead Elm, a town of cracked boards and quieter grudges, barely stirred. Nothing much moved in the heat until a mule-drawn wagon creaked into view from the north trail, wheels wobbling like they might give out at any moment. Samuel Carter stood on the edge of his porch, his coffee cooling in one hand, his eyes narrowing beneath the shadow of his hat. He'd seen a lot of wagons limp their way into town, some full of hope, most packed with regret. But this one carried something different. Maybe it was the quiet way the woman held the reins, back straight despite the road's exhaustion. Maybe it was the two girls in the back, too still for children. Or maybe it was just a feeling Samuel couldn't shake, like the dust that clung to everything in Dead Elm. The wagon didn't make it another 100 yards before the left wheel collapsed with a dry crack. The mule let out a weary groan and dropped its head. The woman jumped down, skirts catching the wind, and moved to check the damage. Samuel set down his mug. By the time she stood up, brushing dirt from her hands, he was already crossing the road, hat low, stride even. "You all right?" he asked, voice rough as gritstone. She hesitated. "We'll manage. Thank you." Her face was drawn, sun-bitten, and hollow around the eyes, but proud. One girl, about 10, peeked out from the wagon's edge. The other, younger and barefoot, sat clutching a worn cloth rabbit with ears half gone. "I can patch that wheel," Samuel offered. The woman hesitated again. "We don't have anything to trade." "I didn't ask." She nodded once, slow. "That's all." He crouched by the axle, inspecting the splintered spoke. "Samuel Carter," he said after a beat. "Miriam Ford." She glanced toward the wagon. "My girls, Beth and Eleanor." Beth, the younger, stared at him like he might disappear if she blinked. Eleanor looked like she'd already seen too much of the world and didn't trust what was left. Samuel worked in silence. His hands, though calloused and worn, moved with practiced patience. Miriam fetched a pail of water from the trough. The girls stayed in the wagon, watching. The sun hung low by the time the wheel was usable again. Not perfect, but enough to roll. "You won't get far tonight," he said, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "The mule looks about done. I've got room in the barn, a roof and food if you want it." Miriam straightened. "We won't be a burden." "Didn't say you would." That night the girls slept in the spare bedroom, once a nursery long ago. Miriam lay on the cot in the front room. Samuel sat by the fire listening to the quiet. It had been a long time since there was more than the wind and creaking wood for company. He didn't ask where she was coming from. Didn't need to. People didn't pass through Dead Elm unless they had nowhere else to go. By morning, the town had noticed. At Tom's general store, the whispers started. Jasper Brannigan claimed he saw them stealing chickens. Miss Loretta said the woman had too much bone in her face to be trustworthy. And by noon, the one name Samuel hoped he'd never hear again rode straight back into town. Caleb Boone. Boone dismounted in front of Carter's place like he was staking a claim. Samuel stepped out onto the porch, his rifle leaning quiet by the door. "Well, I'll be damned," Boone drawled, removing his hat. "Thought you crawled off and died years ago." Samuel didn't flinch. "You were gone longer." Boone's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you've taken in a stray." Samuel's jaw clenched. Boone tilted his head. "Miriam Ford. You know her husband died owing me. Land deal back in Missouri. Dirt poor decisions. Thing is, when a man passes with debt, the next of kin carries the weight. You come all this way for a ghost IOU? I came because what's his became hers, and what's hers is looking mighty fine. That wagon, those girls." His voice dropped low. "You always were soft on widows, Sam." Miriam appeared behind the doorframe, shoulders squared, mouth tight. "I'm not yours to claim," she said. Boone turned, surprised, then smirked. "Darlin', you don't get to decide." "I do," Samuel said, stepping between them. Boone let his hand hover near his belt. "You sure about that? Try me." The air between them thickened like it could catch fire. Finally, Boone chuckled. We'll talk again, next time without the pleasantries. He tipped his hat, swung onto his horse, and rode out with a cloud of dust trailing behind him. When he was gone, Miriam didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. I don't want your war, she said softly. You've got it anyway, Samuel replied. This is my land. I don't let snakes nest in it. That night, the girls huddled closer in their room. Miriam sat with Samuel on the porch, moonlight cutting across her face. Boone won't stop, she said. I know. I don't want my daughters to grow up afraid. Samuel looked out at the hills, voice low. Neither do I. Inside, the fire crackled. A storm was coming, not of wind or rain, but of men and motives buried deep. But for now, there was still quiet. And for the first time in years, Samuel Carter wasn't alone on his porch. The next morning broke slow and red, the kind of sunrise that stains everything in warning. Samuel Carter rose early, out of habit, not sleep. He'd spent the night on the porch, boots still on, eyes drifting toward the ridge Caleb Boone disappeared over. In the kitchen, the scent of cornmeal and coffee greeted him. Miriam moved like someone who never forgot how to ration, quiet, efficient, always watching. She didn't ask for help, but when Samuel handed her the flour sack without a word, she nodded once in appreciation. Beth and Eleanor ate in silence. Beth chewed with purpose. Eleanor, older by 2 years and heavier by 10, studied Samuel the way a child studies a wild dog, fascinated but cautious. You run cattle? She finally asked. Not anymore, Samuel replied. Why not? Cattle don't listen, and neither did the men who came with them. Miriam shot her daughter a look, but Samuel smiled. It had been a long time since someone had asked him a question that didn't start with, "Do you still carry?" By mid-morning, Samuel had hitched up his wagon, loaded his rifle, and brought out 2 bags of feed. Boone had unsettled him, but not just with threats, with memory. Caleb Boone had a way of resurrecting the past just by showing up, and Dead Elm, though quiet, had long ears and a long grudge. You need anything from town? He asked Miriam, already climbing onto the wagon. She shook her head. Just a pair of eyes. Samuel tipped his hat and rode out. Dead Elm's main street wasn't much. A barber, a general store, the saloon and the church. But each building held a dozen mouths, and every mouth held twice as many opinions. Samuel tied off his wagon and stepped into Tom's mercantile. Tom Henderson looked up from his ledger, eyes narrowing. You sure made things noisy, he said by way of greeting. Didn't know feeding people was outlawed now. She's Boone's business. She's no one's business but her own. Tom grunted, then dropped his voice. Boone's been circling. Spent last night at the saloon. Asked about land deeds. Asked about you. Samuel grabbed a tin of coffee, a coil of rope, and 3 boxes of shells. Then let him keep asking. Back at the homestead, the girls were playing in the back field with a rusted tin can and a stick, laughing like children should. Miriam was mending one of Samuel's old shirts, without being asked. He noticed the tightness in her shoulders, though, how her head never turned fully, like she expected something behind her at all times. You expecting company? She asked as Samuel unloaded the wagon. Always. He set the shells on the porch, his eyes scanning the distance. Nothing yet. But Boone had never been the kind to disappear after a single failure. He was methodical, like rot in the foundation. Did he serve? Miriam asked suddenly. Samuel looked at her. Boone? Number War was too organized for him. Then how do you two know each other? Samuel didn't answer right away. He crouched, checked the fence post nearest the gate, and began to retie the rope that held it straight. We grew up on opposite sides of the same coin, he said at last. I wore a badge. He carved names into his pistol grip. He said my husband owed him. Samuel stood. Boone says a lot of things. He wasn't lying. Miriam's voice was flat, emotionless. Henry, he made mistakes. Tried to start something with Boone. Didn't ask questions until the money disappeared. Then the threats started. We ran. Samuel absorbed that in silence. I didn't ask to be rescued, Miriam added. I didn't rescue you. She nodded once, grateful for the honesty. That night, the wind came harder. The sound of the screen door slapping against the house woke Beth. She crept out to the porch where Samuel sat with his rifle across his lap. "Is he coming tonight?" she asked. "Hope not," Samuel replied. Beth crawled into the chair beside him, clutching her rabbit. "Did you ever shoot someone?" she asked. Samuel didn't answer right away. "Yes." "Was he bad?" Samuel looked down at his boots. "Sometimes a man's not good or bad. Sometimes he's just in the way." Beth blinked slowly, absorbing that like scripture. "I don't want Mama to cry again. I'll do my best to see she doesn't." 2 nights later, the sound of hooves woke the house. Samuel was on his feet before the mule even snorted. The girls stayed inside as taught. Miriam lit the lamp and moved to the window. 4 riders, 1 torch. Boone. They didn't charge. They stood, waiting. Samuel walked down the steps, rifle slung but hand resting on the strap. Boone's voice carried on the dry wind. "Time's up, Carter. She's not yours to take." "I ain't taking," Boone called. "I'm just going to burn what she's trying to build." Samuel stepped forward. "Then you'll be ash first." Silence. Then Boone dismounted. The others followed. Samuel raised the rifle, cocked it once. "Try me." Boone laughed. "Not tonight, but soon." He tossed the torch at the fence. It fizzled on the damp post. Then they turned and rode into the dark. Inside, Miriam clutched Eleanor tight. Beth watched the door, rabbit in hand. "They'll be back," she whispered. Samuel shut the door, locked it, and stood still. "We'll be ready," he said. But as the fire crackled and wind howled, even he wasn't sure what ready meant anymore. Boone didn't return the next night, or the one after, which made it worse. Samuel knew silence was rarely mercy. It was a fuse, the quiet before the fire. And while the fence stood untouched and the gate hung steady, something in the air had shifted. The mule flinched at sounds it used to ignore. The girls started whispering instead of talking. And Miriam barely slept. She paced the porch like a woman waiting for a sentence to be handed down. On the 5th morning, a letter arrived. It wasn't stamped, it wasn't sealed. It had been nailed to Samuel's barn door. In shaky, penciled script, "Meet me where it started. 1 rider, 1 shot, or we come for all of it." There was no name. There didn't need to be. Miriam found Samuel reading the note in the glow of dawn. She didn't ask what it said. She only looked at him like she already knew. "He wants a duel," she said. Samuel nodded slowly. "Where it started." Samuel didn't answer at first. He folded the note, tucked it into his coat pocket, and looked out over the field. "There's a place south of here," he said finally. "Old mining road. That's where I stopped being a lawman." "You and Boone?" "He killed a deputy, got away. Town blamed me for letting him go. Truth is, I did." Miriam stepped closer. "Why?" "Because I hesitated." She didn't ask more, but the weight of it landed like thunder. By noon, Samuel had cleaned and reloaded his pistol. Not the rifle, not the shotgun. The Colt Peacemaker he hadn't touched in 7 years. It felt both foreign and too familiar in his hand, like shaking hands with an old ghost. He looked up to find Eleanor watching from the doorway. "You're leaving," she said, voice flat. "Just for a ride." "You're lying." Samuel set the pistol down, holstered it slow. "I won't let him hurt you." "You're not my father," she replied. "I don't have to be." She didn't cry. She didn't flinch, but her shoulders trembled. "Promise me something," she said. "If I can. If he shoots you, don't die slow." Samuel blinked. "Don't let my sister see it." The road south was dry and cracked, lined with brittle sage and memories Samuel never wanted back. He passed the burned husk of an old coach, still half swallowed by the sand. A rusty tin sign dangled from a tree. "Red Hook Mine, closed by order of the county." Boone was already there. He leaned against a split-rail post, coat open, hat low, 6-shooter dangling from a loose belt like it didn't matter. But Samuel knew better. Boone was a killer, not because he enjoyed it, but because he didn't care enough to avoid it. "You came," Boone said, grinning. "You called. 1 shot, Carter. Old-fashioned. One of us walks." Samuel nodded. "That's what you want?" Boone's eyes glittered. "I want her to see what kind of man you really are." "I already showed her." Boone's grin faltered. She's mine." "No," Samuel said, stepping forward. "She was scared. You made her small. You turned a marriage into a contract. And now you want the land, not the woman." Boone shrugged. "Doesn't make me wrong. Number just makes you done." They took their places, 10 paces apart. Sun high, shadows sharp. Boone drew first. Samuel didn't move. The bullet clipped his hat. Then Samuel fired. Boone's gun hand exploded in red. He screamed, dropped to his knees, the pistol clattering to the dust. Samuel walked to him. "You said one shot," he said. "That was mine." Boone snarled. "Kill me then." "No." Samuel tossed the gun aside, pulled a pair of shackles from his coat. He hadn't worn a badge in years, but justice didn't need a title. "I'm taking you to the marshal." Boone spat blood. "You'll never make it out of town." "Maybe not, but they'll know who you are." And with that, he hauled Boone to his feet. Back at the homestead, Miriam waited on the porch, Beth in her lap, Eleanor sitting stiff beside them. When Samuel rode back into view, Boone tied behind him, the girls stood. Beth ran to him first but stopped short of hugging him. "You didn't die," she said. "Not today." Miriam looked at Boone. Bloodied, cuffed, broken, and she didn't blink. "He'll lie," she said. "Tell them I sent you, that I planned this." Samuel nodded. "Then we tell the truth louder." 2 days later, Boone was in Marshal Taylor's custody. He screamed in the jailhouse, but his voice didn't echo like it used to. Word spread quick. The widow, the old gunslinger, and the duel that ended without a funeral. That Sunday, Reverend Crane spoke on mercy, but the townsfolk of Dead Elm looked more at the Carter homestead than the pulpit. At dusk, Samuel sat on the porch, boots off, polishing his Colt. "You gonna hang it up again?" Miriam asked, approaching. "No," he said. "I think I'll keep it where I can see it, but I hope I never fire it again." Miriam looked out toward the town. "They're talking about you. Us. They'll keep talking. They also said you did right." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Did they?" She smiled. "They did." Beth climbed into his lap like she'd always belonged there. Eleanor stayed by the door, but her gaze had softened. Miriam sat beside them. "What now?" "We fix the fence," Samuel said, "and we plant something. A garden. Hope." She laughed, not loud, but enough. And for once, the wind passed over Dead Elm without stirring up the past. Spring came late to Dead Elm that year, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The frost lingered on the ground each morning, and even the birds seemed hesitant to announce anything hopeful. But inside the Carter homestead, something had shifted. Boone was gone, hauled off in shackles by the marshal's men, still shouting promises he wouldn't be allowed to keep. For the first time in weeks, the girls slept through the night. Beth had started singing to her stuffed rabbit again. Eleanor still kept one eye on the door, but she no longer flinched at every knock. And Miriam, she began to breathe. It wasn't dramatic. No weeping release. Just moments. Long silences without panic. Meals where she didn't rush. Mornings where she let herself drink the coffee warm. Samuel noticed. He didn't speak of it. He just made sure there was always enough sugar on the table, and that the porch swing had a cushion for her back. The town, however, hadn't caught up. Reverend Crane paid a visit under the guise of goodwill. His boots tracked dirt onto Miriam's freshly swept floor, and his voice carried too much sweetness to trust. "Some of the elders," he began, "have expressed concern." Samuel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "About?" "The arrangement. A woman living with a man she's not wed to, children in tow. It sets tongues wagging." Miriam's face didn't change. "Is that what concerns the elders? Or is it that I didn't ask their permission to stay?" Crane cleared his throat, flustered. "Now, I didn't come to accuse, but propriety matters. Appearances matter." Samuel spoke before Miriam could. "We're rebuilding a life. If that troubles your congregation, maybe the problem isn't with us." The Reverend left with his pride bruised but intact. By nightfall, Miriam had replaced the doormat with one that read, "If you're coming to judge, don't." Samuel found an old plow in the shed, rusted nearly beyond use. But with Eleanor's help and a lot of elbow grease, they got it into shape. The field behind the house, once overrun with weeds, began to show lines, rows, order. "What are we planting?" Eleanor asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "Corn," Samuel said. "Maybe beans. Depends on what the soil agrees with. And if it doesn't agree, we keep trying." She considered that, then nodded like it made sense. Miriam watched from the porch, one hand resting on Beth's hair, as the girl napped in her lap. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that this wasn't temporary, that maybe, just maybe, they could belong here. A week later, the mayor came. Jeremiah Price was a man of polished boots and dirty hands. He smiled wide, spoke soft, and always had an offer too good to trust. He arrived in a fancy black wagon, drawn by two chestnut horses that had no business being in Dead Elm. "Mr. Carter," he greeted, removing his gloves one finger at a time. "Miss Ford." Samuel didn't answer. Miriam nodded once. "I hear congratulations are in order. Heard you turned the outlaw Boone over to the marshal. The town owes you." Samuel tilted his head. "That's so." "Well," Price chuckled, "maybe not in dollars, but in respect, and maybe an opportunity." Miriam stiffened. Price continued. "See, there's been talk at council meetings about revitalizing this town, drawing in investors, turning Dead Elm into something more than a pit stop." "Always thought it was a place for folks trying to stay hidden," Samuel said. "Maybe once. But change is coming, and I'd like you both involved." "Involved how?" Miriam asked. "Well," Price said smoothly, "there's land grants being offered, council seats opening, positions that could use voices like yours, respected, courageous, forward-thinking." Samuel didn't answer. Price leaned in slightly. "And of course, people are more likely to accept your domestic situation if it's under the banner of civic duty." There it was, the bribe in the pretty box. Miriam looked at Samuel, then back at Price. "We're not for sale." Price's smile didn't waver, but his eyes turned cold. "Just think it over. Town's moving forward. Be ashamed to be left behind." He tipped his hat and left. The shine on his wagon wheels lingered longer than his words. That night, Samuel brought out the whiskey. He poured one glass, took a sip, then handed it to Miriam. "I don't drink," she said. "This ain't for drinking," he replied. "It's for burning things down when words don't work." She took it. Outside, Eleanor practiced lighting the lanterns. Beth picked wildflowers and made crowns for the chickens. It was a strange kind of peace, but it was theirs. "We could leave," Miriam said suddenly. "Take the girls. Go farther west." "You could." "I'm not sure I want to." Samuel looked at her. Not the way a man looks at something beautiful, but the way a man looks at something that might last. "Then don't." They sat in silence for a while. The moon rose. The chickens clucked. The wind didn't carry any threats. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them were waiting for something bad to happen. The next day, a wagon pulled up to the homestead. It wasn't Price. It wasn't Boone. It was a Lakota man, young, steady-eyed, dressed in travel-worn leather and carrying a woven bag across his chest. Behind him stood two others, silent, older, respectful. The youngest stepped forward, offered a small pouch, and spoke in careful English. "From my father. He says you treated his sister with honor during the fire season, years ago." Samuel took the pouch, surprised. "You're Runs in Shadows, boy?" The young man nodded. "I am Eli." Samuel opened the pouch. Inside were seeds, corn, beans, medicine root, carefully wrapped in red cloth. "My father says you might need stronger crops." Miriam stepped beside him, stunned. "They came all this way. For us?" Eli looked at her, then at the girls. "You are growing a new family. That matters." Beth stepped out from behind her mother. "Are you staying?" Eli smiled faintly. "Only if invited." Miriam looked at Samuel. Samuel looked at the field. "Then welcome." Eli stayed. Not in the house, at first. He made camp beneath the cottonwoods at the far edge of Samuel's field, where the soil began to slope toward the creek. Each morning, he'd appear before the girls were even dressed, already hauling water, reinforcing the chicken coop, or sharpening old tools. He didn't speak much, but when he did, people listened. At first, Eleanor watched him like she was waiting for a trick. Beth followed him around like a shadow. Miriam, Miriam tried not to watch him at all, but Samuel did. He watched the way Eli handled quiet, the way he moved with certainty without claiming space, how he carved a new handle for the axe without being asked, and how, when a passing trader mocked the makeshift clothesline behind the house, Eli's eyes didn't waver, but his hand found the knife at his belt. He respects boundaries, Samuel said over supper. He watches everything, Miriam replied. He knows what danger smells like. Miriam stirred her stew. He's also young. And dangerous? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. But neither of them told Eli to leave. The crops had started to sprout. It wasn't much, green slivers pushing through stubborn dirt, but it felt like proof that something buried could still rise. Miriam and the girls dug with their hands, planting herbs and squash, while Eli tilled new rows at the back. One evening, after the sun had ducked behind the ridge, Eli asked if he could cook. He made rabbit stew over an open flame with herbs Miriam didn't recognize. She stood nearby, arms folded, pretending not to care. But when she tasted the first spoonful, she sat down without a word and finished the bowl. "Where'd you learn to cook like that?" Eleanor asked. "My mother," Eli said. "She said food could be a blessing or a weapon. Depends who's eating." Beth scrunched her nose. "Does that mean I'm armed?" Eli smiled. It was the first time they saw him laugh. That night, as the fire burned low and the girls fell asleep on a quilt near the porch, Miriam found herself alone with Eli under the stars. "You could have gone back after delivering the seeds." He nodded. "I still could. But you haven't. I think something important is growing here." She glanced at the field. "The squash?" "No," he said quietly, looking at her. "Something else." Trouble came not with Boone this time, but with the council. Mayor Price returned, but not alone. He brought 6 men, including 2 deputies, all on horseback. They stopped at the gate without dismounting. Samuel stepped out with his sleeves rolled, sweat still on his brow from hammering fence posts. Eli moved silently behind him, just far enough to avoid threatening, just close enough to be seen. "Carter," Price called, "we're here on town business." "You always are," Samuel replied. "What kind today?" "We're enforcing a new ordinance. No unregistered outsiders may reside on private property without council approval." Samuel stared. "You wrote a law about Eli?" "It's public safety. You've taken in fugitives, outlaws now." His voice lowered. "A Lakota scout with military training? That makes folks nervous." Samuel crossed his arms. "You're nervous. Say it plain." "We want him gone." Miriam stepped forward then, her voice sharper than any blade. "He's done more work in 3 weeks than half this town in 3 years. "This isn't up for debate," Price snapped. "You're sheltering an unverified individual. If he's not gone by week's end, we find the property. Then seize it." "You'll seize nothing," Samuel growled. The deputies rested hands on their weapons, and then Eli stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for anything. He simply said, "I am not a threat, unless I must be." Price flinched, just enough for everyone to see it. "We'll be back," he muttered, "with a warrant." The hooves thundered away. That night the house felt smaller. "We should go," Eli said, standing near the fire. "No," Miriam said. "This isn't your fight." She stepped closer. "That's where you're wrong." Eleanor looked between them, then at Samuel. "What if they come with guns?" Samuel didn't blink. "Then we remind them this land wasn't built by men in suits." 2 days passed. The townsfolk avoided the Carter homestead. But not all. A woman named May Peterson dropped off bolts of fabric for the girls. One of the blacksmith's sons brought nails and chicken wire. Quiet defiance. Samuel said nothing, but when he spotted fresh wagon tracks at the gate, his eyes glinted with something fierce. On the 3rd morning, the council returned, this time with a writ and rifles. But they weren't alone. As the riders approached the field, the Carter porch was not empty. Samuel stood with his rifle, Miriam beside him, holding Eleanor's hand. Beth stood bravely on a barrel, her rabbit tucked under one arm like a soldier's flag. And Eli? Eli wasn't on the porch. He stepped out of the corn rows, bow in hand. 3 other Lakota men emerged behind him, elders Samuel hadn't seen in years. They didn't speak, but their presence roared. Price's horse spooked. "This is town property now," he said, voice shaking. Samuel shook his head. "Number, this is home." He stepped forward, rifle low but loaded. "You want it?" he said. "Come take it." The deputies looked at each other, then at the elders, then at Eli. They didn't move. The standoff lasted a breath, then two. Price spat in the dirt. "You've made your choice." He turned his horse. They rode away and didn't come back. That night Miriam wept, not from fear, but from the weight finally falling off her shoulders. Eli sat beside her on the porch, silent until the moon rose high. "I've never belonged anywheres," he said. "You do now," she replied. He looked at her, really looked, and she didn't look away. Spring settled in like an old wound, mending slow. The frost lingered longer than it should, and the wind still carried the scent of ash some mornings. But life had a way of pushing forward, even through scorched soil. The Carter homestead no longer felt like a place of waiting. It moved, it breathed. Miriam's garden took root in neat rows. Eli's gifted seeds, corn, beans, and medicine root, pushed green through tired earth. The girls chased fireflies again, and Samuel Carter stopped checking the corners of every room. One morning, Miriam looked at the creaking boards beneath her feet and said, "We should build something permanent." Samuel, fixing the porch rail, looked up. "What do you mean?" "A house that doesn't creak, a kitchen with windows that face the sunset, a room for each of the girls. Something that says we stayed." He didn't answer right away. He just nodded and picked up his hammer. They built it together. Eli dug the new foundation with quiet efficiency, his muscles taut beneath sun-worn leather. Samuel measured and sawed, calloused hands rediscovering purpose. Miriam designed a layout that curved with light, not against it. Eleanor painted the trim crimson, declaring it brave. Beth planted marigolds around the baseboards, whispering to them like secrets. And Eli, he stayed, not just in body but in rhythm. He learned to read Eleanor's silences. He let Beth braid feathers into his hair without protest. He carved a wind chime from pine and hung it beneath Miriam's kitchen window. But at night, when the house quieted and laughter faded, Eli would sit alone near the fence, watching the horizon like it might change its mind. He didn't say much, but one evening after dinner, Samuel joined him. "You thinking of leaving?" Eli's jaw tightened. "I was taught not to linger." Samuel leaned on the post beside him. "Staying ain't weakness." "I know." "Do you?" Eli didn't look away. "I don't want to be tolerated. I want to be needed, or not at all." Samuel nodded slowly. "Then build with us. That's how a man earns ground." Inside, Miriam swept dust from the new floorboards, her body moving on muscle memory. But her thoughts drifted elsewhere. Back to Boone's boots on the porch, to threats tossed like coins, to promises of silence through fear. Sometimes when the wind shifted just right, she still heard his voice. But now it didn't shake her bones. It only made her close the shutters with a firmer hand. One night, the porch swing creaked under Eli's weight. Miriam sat beside him, arms folded, eyes on the stars. "You planning to stay?" she asked softly. "Depends." "On what?" "On whether what we're building here is real, or just borrowed time." Miriam turned. "Do I look like a woman building on borrowed time?" He considered her. "Number, you look like the reason it holds." She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. His voice dropped. "I've had to move on from everything I've ever cared about. But this feels like something a man should fight to keep." Miriam's voice was barely a whisper. "Then stay. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because we're better with you here." He didn't reach for her. Not yet. But his arm brushed hers. Slow, quiet, deliberate. She didn't pull away. That weekend the townsfolk came. Not with torches, with tools. May Peterson brought flour and extra nails. The blacksmith's eldest son carried lumber from his father's shop. Reverend Crane offered no sermon, just a saw and a nod. They didn't ask questions. They just helped. By the following Sunday, the house stood proud. The new roof gleamed like stubborn hope. The garden buzzed with bees. The girls painted the front steps sunflower yellow. And Samuel, he stood at the edge of the porch, watching Miriam move through the doorway, with the ease of someone who belonged. "She did it," he muttered. "She made it real." That night, they sat under the stars, all of them. Beth fell asleep with her head in Eli's lap, her rabbit tucked safely beside her. Eleanor leaned into Samuel's side, her walls not down, but no longer fortified. Miriam looked at the fire. "We should name it." "The house?" Samuel asked. "Number all of it. This place, what we built." Samuel thought for a long moment. Then, "A house that stood." Eli looked up. "Even when they tried to burn it?" Miriam nodded. "Exactly." The wind passed over them, light and clean, and for once it carried no ghosts. They called her a widow, a burden, a curse, but she built something stronger than they ever did. Not just a home, but a way forward. And when the porch light flickered against the wind that used to tear her down, she didn't flinch, because now she wasn't standing alone. And the town, it finally stood with her. If this story moved you, share it, like it. Tell someone who needs to hear it that silence isn't strength, standing is.